Hello and welcome to Writing Today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to create a sense of danger and urgency in your thriller novel. As always, you can read this blog post on my website, thepennedsleuth.com. There's a link to that in the description below. And if you're interested in furthering your writing education, there's a link to a free writing course as well. Now, all thriller writers out there know that we want to create a story that keeps the reader on the edge of their seat. We want to subtly build the tension towards the reveal or the twist ending. And I'm going to be talking about why this tension is so important to the genre and different techniques to help you build it. Now, tension is that feeling of uncertainty, that building anxiety. When the character is in a dangerous situation, one where there is no absolute sense of safety, they begin to grow uneasy. When you're reading a thriller novel, these are the moments where things feel a little too quiet, that there is something lurking there in the darkness. And the key to writing tension is that you don't want to just drop the reader into the middle of it. You want to build it as the story progresses. And there are several techniques to help you do that. The first technique is foreshadowing. It's a technique used by all genres of writers. Simply drop hints about what is going to happen later in the story. This creates a sense of anticipation and keeps the reader guessing. One way to do this is to establish a pattern with the threat, like it only attacks when you're alone, or when it's dark, or when you're out in the open. When a reader starts to learn about these details, these hints, these methods, they start to become a bit more tense when the main character finds themselves in similar circumstances. The second method is simply to withhold information. You don't want to give it all away. You want most of the threat's details and methods to remain a mystery, which establishes a sense of uncertainty. And that is to your advantage because you want the reader to use their imagination to figure out what is lurking in the darkness, because quite often they'll imagine something a lot darker than the reality of your story. The third technique is to use descriptions to create a sense of unease. Whether it is subtle or not, taking the time to use descriptive language and imagery to set the scene and establish odd details is a great way to make the reader feel like something is off or not quite right. And these are simple situations that your character can find themselves in, one where they're in a comfortable environment, be it at home or at work, but they notice that there are some oddities. For example, there is a light on in one of the rooms, but they're not sure if they are the ones who turned it on. And if they're all alone, this makes them a lot more tense. I should also say that building tension in your story is kind of done differently over the three segments of your story, the beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, you are aiming to establish a sense of unease. You do this by introducing an unsettling situation or a character with a mysterious past. There is a possibility of a threat, but there's no evidence to suggest there is one. It's an uneasy situation at best. In the middle segment, tension starts to build. The reader has gone from feeling uneasy to pure dread. Something terrible is going to happen. And you can increase this sense of dread by including more risky situations or introducing new characters that the main character and reader are unfamiliar with. It's at this point in the story there is evidence to suggest there is a threat. We're just not exactly sure what it may be. And when we have that feeling and we are put in more risky situations and we introduce some new characters, the threat can be all around us. So that definitely helps build the tension. And finally, there's the ending segment where the tension is at its peak. It's normally at this point in the story that a little more is learned about the threat and there is a final confrontation or twist ending. By noting these differences in each segment, you should have an easier time of establishing tension throughout your novel. Now let's talk about the creation of stakes for your characters. And the stakes are simply the consequences of your character's actions and decisions. These are the reasons the reader will care about what happens to your character, especially if the stakes are high. And this will also create a sense of urgency if these stakes have a time constraint to them. For example, let's say your protagonist is being pursued by a threat and they reach a fork in the road. One way leads away from the character's friends, and the other path leads towards them. Should your main character lead the threat away and attempt to fight or lose the threat on their own? or should the character run towards the friends and put them at risk as well? And that brings me to the 3 points that you want to establish with your stakes. The first point is that the stakes need to be personal to your main character. The main character needs to care about these consequences. The second point is you want the stakes to grow higher with the story. You want them to develop as the plot progresses. And the third point is you want these stakes to be believable. You want them to make sense. You want the reader to feel the weight of them in your story. Now, if you are still unsure of what stakes to include in your story, here's a short list that summarizes the most popular stakes which are established in thriller stories. First of all, your character's life is in danger. That's a very obvious stake to have in place. The threat in your story has made your protagonist their primary target in some way. Anything that suggests that the character's life is in danger. The second stake is perhaps a character's loved one is in danger. It could be your protagonist's friend, their spouse, or a member of their family. The third stake is your character is simply trying to survive a tense moment. A life or death situation, such as escaping a car crash or surviving in a forest and one day returning to civilization. The next stake is a character is just trying to prevent a disaster from happening. Perhaps your antagonist is planning a larger attack where multiple people are in danger. And finally, let's say your character has been falsely accused of something, so they are fighting to clear their name before they are either caught, thrown in jail, or worse. But if there is one point in this discussion that I want you to focus on, it is making these stakes personal and relatable to the reader. The reader needs to understand their importance, how dire they are. And if the reader does, they'll be more engaged with the story. A reader won't find themselves attached to a story if the stakes are unbelievable or unrelatable, as then they won't be able to form a more personal connection with the story. And now let's talk about developing that danger, because while we do have the reader feeling a sense of danger, we need to make sure that this feeling progresses, it develops over the course of the story. And the way that we develop this danger is we make it a bit more tangible and a bit more threatening. If the situations become a lot more serious, and this idea of danger a lot more real, the reader will have that feeling grow as the story progresses. Because you can only keep a reader in suspense for so long before they start wanting something to happen. And the last thing you want to do is throw away all of that tension build-up because the reader has grown tired of the same scenes when nothing is really happening. For example, the long dark hallway is terrifying to walk down a few times. After that, the imposing feeling starts to dwindle and it becomes an average hallway. It's at this point you need to start developing the danger, otherwise the concept of danger loses its impact, and again, all that build-up is lost. And I'm sure you've encountered such a thriller story, be it a novel or a short story, where the danger doesn't seem to grow. And for that reason, the scare factor of the story just doesn't have that much of an impact as other great thriller stories do. So here are 3 techniques to make the danger feel a bit more real and threatening in your novel. First of all, remind the reader about the threat whenever you feel it's been too long since the threat was present. You can do this with hints, evidence of their presence, or perhaps even a close encounter with that threat. Second, you can make the threat more credible. If it isn't believable or relevant to the story, the reader will have a tough time staying engaged. The most gripping thrillers are the ones that feel the most real. And finally, give the reader a breather now and then. Unless you want your story to be a rush of suspense and thrills from beginning to end, you will give the reader a moment to catch their breath. In these moments, the character thinks about what has happened so far. No threat is omnipotent or ever-present, which makes these moments realistic. And this makes for good storytelling sense as well. You're developing many important aspects in your story all the time, be it the world space, the plot, or the characters. So you need to develop the tension as well. Now, if this does sound like a balancing act, it's because it is. You can only keep the reader in that same level of suspense for a certain amount of time before they start getting tired of it. So yes, you have learned how to establish that danger and urgency, but it isn't as simple as that. There are steps to it, there are levels, and you need to progress them as the story progresses as well. Now, of the hundreds of short stories that I've written, Many of them were thriller stories. I even created a thriller story series, books which were compilations of thriller short stories called Dread. So after years of working with the genre and teaching it, the primary element that I'm concerned with, as well as my students, is that creeping feeling of dread. And what I've also noticed is that the cliché scenes still work. They still have a great impact on the reader. These are the scenes where the main character finds themselves alone at home after dark, or they're exploring a creepy mansion, or they're lost in a forest. These are the scenes that readers have no doubt read so many times, but they still have that creepy feeling. And there are many reasons these scenes work so well. First of all, they're relatable. A reader has often imagined these scenes without a novel's help. And second of all, these are situations where danger lurks around every corner. If it's in a forest, danger could be behind any tree. If it's in an unfamiliar location, it can be in any room. And if it's after dark, the danger can lurk in any shadow. And it's these situations that puts the reader's imagination into overdrive. The suggestion of a threat without actually revealing any important details about it is enough for the reader to start building the tension for themselves. Danger and urgency is a great way to keep the reader invested and turning pages, and I do hope you found these tips helpful in doing that. But if you have any experience with the thriller genre and want to share some of your thoughts, please do so in the comments below. What advice would you give other writers to help establish tension in their story? And that brings us to the end of this video. If you want to check out my writer's workshop, or perhaps a free writing course, there's a link to that in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, good day, good night, and happy writing.